This podcast accompanies the acclaimed new docuseries In the Eye of the Storm, which follows the remarkable journey of maverick economist, politician and whistleblower Yanis Varoufakis. Both the series and podcast explore the connections between power, democracy, capitalism and the deepening crises of civilization. The series is available to watch now. Details in the description. Enjoy the conversation.
I was looking through your Twitter feed.
Yeah.
And it's this incredible mix of very, very funny posts and really serious, heartfelt posts. How do you see the relationship between kind of the art and the politics?
Well, number one, I really love people and I love making stuff for them. You know, my favorite stuff to do is a book or a TV show or a movie or something. But even if I'm just putting stuff out there on Twitter, which is just, you know, various brain droppings, I think people can really handle quite a wide gamut of stuff. You know, people love absurd stuff and they love really heartfelt, genuine stuff. And we have pretty big, unnecessarily, some might say, large frontal lobes that really don't mind that. And I think even rather enjoy it. You know, variety, people love it. So I don't know that it's conscious, but I guess when I noticed it about myself, I thought that's fine. People are intelligent and like to get a nice variety of stuff.
And just following up on that, do you ever hesitate about sort of sharing your views on some issues where others may stay silent for fear of flack or criticism? I mean, how do you navigate that?
Not really. I have grown up in the United States and then moved to the UK near the end of my fourth decade. So a little before I turned 40. So I had almost 4 decades, for example, of American private insurance funded healthcare. And then I came to the UK and found the NHS. And because I'm in the public eye, I do feel a responsibility to talk about things that I might have a clearer perspective on than some others, only from, not that I'm special, it's just that I lived for a long time in the US, you know, well into adulthood with private health insurance. And then I moved to a new system, which just boggled my mind. So I'm going to talk about it, you know, so that's, you know, anybody who's heard anything from me under the guise of politics or trying to be persuasive about anything, it might be the NHS that they heard me talking about. Mm-hmm. And then also 6 years ago, my wife and I, our son Henry died of cancer, and that changed things for me because he died. His health is declining and he ultimately dies at the exact same moment that my career is really in the ascendant. So I was in a very strange situation of being in a pediatric cancer ward in an NHS hospital, surrounded by people from all walks of life, including people who were very poor. And then I would go maybe to an award ceremony, for example, a few blocks away from a hospital and be seated next to billionaires. And that, for me, kind of bouncing between those worlds so quickly and regularly as our son was dying, really, for me, burned out any desire to impress anybody or kowtow. I just didn't care because I realized, you know, the nurse who can't afford to live anywhere near the hospital and has to take 3 buses to get to work and is not being remunerated properly for what she does for a living, she doesn't deserve to be in that situation. Then the billionaire media company owner that I'm seated next to at the Emmy Awards, he doesn't deserve those billions. So it was at that point that I realized, like, wow, this system is so brutal, is merciless with everybody in it. And I said, you know what, look, for whatever reason, I have become part of the, you know, I'm in the public eye because of the stuff that I do. I got to talk about it. what's the point? And so for me, it was sort of like a nothing to lose kind of a thing. I just, and the death of our wonderful son it ruined me in certain ways, but it didn't destroy my love for my fellow man. So shame on me if I don't talk about the things that I've seen and try to become the most effective class trader now that I've bounced up a few tax brackets because of what I do for a living. Shame on me if I don't shout to everybody like, it's a scam, because it is. So that was a lot. I just said a lot, but now you know more about me.
I had heard about the story of your son, and what can I say? I'm speechless, and words will fail me if I try to use them to add anything to what you just said. On behalf of those who care about public health and who've been trying to defend the NHS in Britain and similar systems across Europe, your work is essential. We are grateful for it. You've been an important part of the Save Our NHS campaign, which Raul, Francesca, myself, others have been working towards. So thank you for that. To change slightly but only very slightly, the discussion, let me say that, ever since I moved to England, which was a very long time ago, 1978, I was impressed by the way in which comedians, people using the medium of comedy, ended up within a year of Thatcher taking over and, the neoliberal catastrophe, using the same word as your program, your show, hit Britain. And from Britain it spread like a bushfire to Europe and elsewhere. The way that comedians, progressive comedians, ended up being the only voice of reason, the only serious challengers to the Thatcherite malaise. I remember when I lived there, I would listen to Parliament. There was no serious opposition to Thatcher. Thatcher would wipe the floor clean with them. Perhaps only Tony Benn, but he never reached the higher echelons of the Labour Party. The official opposition to Thatcher they were just not just ineffective, but pathetic. And the only voices, public voices, during that period of the early Thatcher years were comedians. Like, people like Ben Elton, who would come out and, with very much with, you reminded me as you were speaking now with this, this combination of seriousness and humor and comedy. That was the only way that it was the only silver lining to the darkness that Thatcherism bestowed upon us, upon the whole society. And that's something you have in common with the United States. Well, something that you Anglo-Americans share. Yeah. Whereas in the rest of Europe, comedians tend to be comedians tend to be quite apolitical, and when they do become political, they are simply not very funny. This is one of the good things about the Anglosphere, the way in which comedy ends up being quite progressive. Not all the time, but a significant amount of the time.
Yeah, and I guess the thing about comedy, and you don't have to be funny to get ideas across, but it's a really nice spice to the dish. You know what I mean? Because, we can list facts and stuff. Great. We need facts. And it's nice to package them as efficiently as possible, but to sort of leaven it with comedy really helps deliver it better. So, I wouldn't call myself a political comedian, but if that's what is funny, then, I'm going to talk about it, if I find something funny about it. And then also I don't feel the pressure to be funny all the time. So I think it's perfectly fine to, relax and not always be going after the laughs. But I do think a good comedian or funny writer or just funny person, God knows, probably the hardest we've ever all laughed wasn't at a comedian, but was at our silly friend Rhonda, who for whatever reason, who says everything she says is funny. Humor really helps us understand things better. And so I would caution anybody who has a political project that they wish to promote, espouse, share. Yeah, don't forget the comedy, because it's a pretty effective tool. Plus also, real laughter is involuntary. So when something makes you laugh, what's happened is a little bit of a rug has been pulled out from under you. There's been the element of surprise. And, it's just kind of like a bell ringing inside of yourself. So comedy's, I'd say, indispensable. If you really want to triangulate, you really want to surround something with as many methods of, mining it as possible, you cannot omit the comedy, or you probably won't get as far as you could otherwise.
As you know, my sister, Francesca Martinez, is a comedian. And I've learned from kind of observing her career and traveling with her and seeing a lot of comedians, there seem to be at least two principles that recur again and again. And one is the importance of honesty, that you really have to be honest as a comedian to kind of break through. And part of that honesty is rooting what you're saying in personal experience. And the story that you just shared about your path into NHS activism and how much that was rooted in such a raw experience of your own. I don't think there's a more powerful way to communicate one's perspective of the world than telling a story about how you got there, which wherever you lie, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, is going to touch you, it's going to reach you. So maybe you could, for us Brits, maybe you could just unpack a bit the nature of the healthcare system in the US and how it sort of compares.
Well, sure, yes. And I'll illustrate it with stories from my own life. So a couple days ago was my 22nd anniversary of sobriety. I quit drinking after drinking destructively for a long time 22 years ago. And what happened 22 years ago is I drove a car into a building. No one else was hurt, but I broke both my arms badly and had to have surgery on both. And at court, the judge said to me, he said, you can go back to jail for X amount of time, or you can go to rehab for longer and then move into a sober living halfway house for a longer period of time. And I said, you know what, I can no longer drink. So I would like to, please, sir, may I go to rehab and then the halfway house? And I did that, and I had surgeries, one on each arm. And I had private health insurance at the time through Blue Cross of California. I remember in the year 2002, I paid about $130 a month for health insurance. And I am the son of insurance agents. So they made sure that once I outgrew their insurance, that I bought my own insurance. So I was paying $130 a month, which was quite reasonable for 22 years ago in America. I mean, imagine even now paying that in the UK. But so I was happy to pay my $130 a month. Once I started to generate bills for the insurance company, because of the surgeries and a 28-day stay in a hospital, they looked at all my stuff and they said, you know what, I think we're going to not insure you anymore. We're going to drop you. And not only are we not going to pay for your stuff, we're not even going to let you pay $130 a month to us anymore. Our relationship is over. And so I pretty quickly amassed about $50,000 of medical debt 20 plus years ago. That's terrifying. I'm 25 years old at the time. I most certainly do not have $50,000 anywhere. I've never made $50,000 a year or anything like that's. I didn't know what to do. And okay, so I've got debt, and medical debt of a pretty significant nature. And then I had to get a job at a terrible company, a terrible internet nonsense company. Talk about, I mean, bullshit jobs. I worked at a company that did lead generation, meaning a company that would do a pop-up on your website saying, would you like a better auto loan? Then get all this information from you and then sell that information to competing loan. I mean, just garbage. But I had to do it to get the health insurance because I lived in the United States of America. And this is not an uncommon story in America. And so by this point, I'm like, wow, something's wrong. You know, granted, should I have drank the way that I did? No. Should I have driven into the building? No. Was I responsible for my own situation? Yes, I absolutely was. But at the same time, from a humanistic perspective, am I a piece of garbage who should be discarded and saddled with unbelievable debt, you know, in their relative youth so that they can't contribute, you know? And so I disagreed, you know, fundamentally with what was happening. And so then a few years later, 2002, Barack Obama comes along and says, get this. I'm going to create something called the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, and I'm going to require every American to pay monthly for private health insurance. And no one can deny you, right? And to me, growing up in America, I'm like, this is amazing. He's going to force us to pay a pretty big premium each month, but not just force. He's going to allow me to do that. So I was like, this is great, you know? And the fact is it was a step forward, okay? A small one, an embarrassing one when you look at the rest of the world, you know? But so I was like, holy mackerel, the Affordable Care Act. This guy's going to let me / force me to pay $130. Like I was, so if you so I've already described several insane things to you over the last few minutes. That's a pretty good picture. Americans have to become so familiar with all these bizarre systems. Maybe, for example, and this is a common one, you have private health insurance that you pay for either on your own or you get it as a benefit from a job that you really very much might not like. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Everybody has a different relationship with work. You have this separate from the insurance you use to see the doctor is your prescription insurance, which allows you to get your insulin or your eyeglasses, right? Or medicine for your kid who has cancer. I mean, everything. And you can go with your card, which is proof that you've been paying your premiums. You go to CVS, that's a popular American pharmacy chain. They take your card, they say, oh, you know what? Your prescription plan sold your insurance. I mean, this is like collateralization of debt. I mean, this is so mortgagey. Oh, they've sold your plan to another private company, didn't tell you about it, and you now have to go figure out how to work all that out. But anyway, in the meantime, no, you cannot have the, I don't know, steroid medication that your daughter needs for her cystic fibrosis. Sorry, you know, like, that's for people who are playing the game and paying on a monthly basis. Every American has either had that happen to them or spoke earlier this morning with someone who's had that happen to them. So that's America right now. And it's diabolical.
You just reminded me some years ago, it was 2012, when Obama was in the process of being reelected his second term. Mm-hmm. My wife and I lived in Texas, of all places, back then. Mm-hmm. And we were taking a road trip. You know, that was the dream to crisscross the states. And I had car travel in Idaho. Mm-hmm. So I was waiting in a godforsaken place at some garage for the car to be fixed. And there was this bar. So I was waiting there. I had a few hours to kill while the car was being fixed. And there was this truck driver. It was a trucker's stop. And very nice truck driver in his late 60s, which is quite old for a truck driver. And so we started talking, and he shared with me his life story, his tragedy. And his tragedy was that he had retired when he was 58, 59. He had a pretty good life, but then he got sick and he became bankrupt as a result of shenanigans with his insurance policy. The insurance policy company refused to pay for his treatment. He had cancer. He recovered from cancer, but he ended up with $300,000 worth of medical debt. His wife left him. The house, his household broke down. Problem with children and so on. So in his late 60s, he started driving again. And he was telling me about the difficulty of staying awake. He was jeopardizing his health because he needed to take amphetamines to stay awake on the wheel. My heart was sort of getting so heavy just hearing that story. And I dared say that this just goes to show, mate, that this country desperately needs a proper health service, a public health service, because health should not be a commodity. It should be something that you take for granted in the same way you take national defense. You don't need to take an insurance out against intruders into your country. You have your and I was trying to invoke patriotism in him. Yeah. And it was as if I had insulted his religion, his mother, his brothers, his children. He was scathing about Obamacare, not from a left-wing perspective that it was not good enough, but how dare he insinuate that the state should look after me and my health. And I thought, oh my God. And then he went into a soliloquy about how he refuses to live in a country that would take $1 from a rich man to pay for his health. And that he prefers to live in a country where he's suffering what he's suffering than to be in a country that violates his dignity by taxing the rich to sustain a health service for him. I have to say to you, Rob, and to you, Raoul, that at that point, that was probably the first and last time I was lost for words. I mean, I had no arguments. I mean, what do you say to this man? What do you say to? And he's a person who is suffering from the lack of a public health service, and who is deeply and genuinely, authentically insulted by my suggestion that there should be, something like a national health service, because he refuses to see, and for him, it was more important that Jeff Bezos. He didn't mention Jeff Bezos. I'm bringing him up. Has his $250 billion in the bank, and not one of them being taken away. That was far more important to him than the destruction of his family life. And I thought to myself, I couldn't be a politician in this country because, I simply do not have the arguments by which to approach somebody like, and he was a good man. I could see from his eyes, I could see from the emotion that he was spilling out that he was a good person. He was not a bad person. He was a suffering, good person. And these are the people who vote for Trump. And this is my greatest criticism of Democrats, of the Hillary Clinton and so on, calling someone like him deplorable, demonizing him as an idiot who votes stupidly for Trump and so on. That is the greatest service to fascism.
No, you can't do that.
But I don't know. At the same time, I don't have the answer. So how do you approach somebody like that?
I mean, I would say, so on a one-on-one basis, I'm very happy to discuss stuff with anybody of any political stripe, happy to discuss anything with any individual. When you get up to the level of newspaper owner or billionaire, then no, I don't need to speak with them. We don't really have a lot to say to each other. But when we're talking about systems, you can come down hard on, for example, a Donald Trump health non-plan, you know what I mean? But because like that guy you're talking about, he has family members he loves. I mean, when you get to the root of that guy, he wants what we want, which is, you know, safety, warmth, food for his family and stuff. So yeah, but again, that's why I wouldn't work in politics, because I'm not. And also why I wouldn't run for office. And I think people should get very involved politically for a variety of reasons, one of which it's literally fun, and you meet fun and cool, like-minded people when you get involved in democratic actions. And there's many ways to be involved in what is politics without running for office. But because like that's why, because like I'm in the public eye, I'm not going to run for office, because who am I going to run against? I mean, I'm already me, you know what I mean? You're already you. Just be who you are, and you know, sort of attraction rather than promotion is quite a great way to get people to do stuff. As is asking questions and listening. I mean, I would never yell at somebody. I remember I was at an NHS rally, and this very ginned up woman came over and started yelling at a nurse who's on the picket line saying she's not XYZ enough. And I'm like, excuse me, she very likely organized this thing that we're at. And, you know, maybe she doesn't subscribe to the exact sub-church of ideals that you might, but if it like take a step back, and this woman is doing wonderful stuff. So yeah, it's weird. You, I think, have to be really sensitive and inquisitive, and often quiet when you're talking about politics with somebody else who might not agree with you. But then, yes, with the systems, you can be brutal with a sledgehammer. You know, for example, like I would just listen to that guy in the diner, and then if I did work in government, I would work to just plow single-payer healthcare into his life. Don't even need to talk to him about it. But once he gets a sweet little taste of, you know, not worrying about those premiums, you'd never be able to take it away from him, you know? So it's interesting,
you know,
the way of...
The problem is that, you know, our own side, supposedly, you know, Obama has given him very good reasons for loathing that kind of politics. Because, you know, let's not forget that in the second term, in the second campaign that Obama won, a very large chunk of his money came from insurance companies, because Obamacare degenerated into a scam that profited them magnificently. Because by not introducing the public aspect, you know, the public option in Obamacare, essentially he forced Americans to be paying premium without return and without competition from a public NHS kind of thing. And in the end, so, you know, this truck driver in Idaho, who, you know, he had a kind of purity of thought, which the Obama supporters did not have. Because he was saying, okay, look, individualism, everyone for himself. If I suffer for this, so be it. Your Obama, he would say, in the name of serving the public interest, is lining his pockets. And in the end, the people that he claims to have served end up with nothing. So, and you have a whole liberal establishment, which is demonizing the truck drivers of Idaho, right? And that is simply water in the watermill of Donald Trump. Then, you know, then you have to run for office, Rob, because, you know, I like you. I never imagined myself running for office. Never. I didn't want it. I was always a political animal. I was always an activist since I was 11. But I always disdained the idea of seeking votes. And as Raul knows, it was only when I was 55 that I entered the electoral circus, only because for a few years I had opened my mouth and I had said things, and then at some point a young man who was going to become prime minister said to me, yeah, what you're saying is absolutely right, we have to do it, but I need you to be a minister to do it. And at that point, what the hell do you do? You know, you have to put your money where your mouth is. And then once I was in there, and I had acquired, I was elected. People would stop me on the street and say, "I voted for you. I believed in you. Don't you abandon me." That's it. Trap.
Yeah.
So I'm still in it.
Yeah. That's funny, but no, it's got to be a transaction. It's got to be a quid pro quo. I give you my vote. You give me something back, or shame on you.
You fight for me.
I want, and people forget that. No one is owed a vote.
I mean, the tragedy, as we all know, in terms of healthcare, is that instead of the US moving towards our old model, an actual public service, the NHS is rapidly being privatized. And the privatization is being driven not just by the right wing, the Conservative Party, but by the Labour Party. And Starmer is very open about this now, that there's not even an attempt to really conceal what their plans are. After reneging on every promise that they've made, they're now very open about the privatization. And I just want to say, Yanis, as an economist, why is it such a bad idea to privatize healthcare? Is there an argument from that angle that you can make?
There is no argument in favor of private healthcare. I mean, even if you take what's called neoclassical economics, which is the right-wing neoliberal type of economic theory, even within that, health and education can never be provided properly by the private sector, even within the right-wing mindset. I was being taught in the 70s and 80s right-wing economics, and even they were saying that health and education needs to be private, needs to be public. Even Adam Smith, the great patron saint of free market capitalism, clearly states that education must be public. And the reason is very, very simple. I'm talking now from a liberal right-wing perspective. When it comes to potatoes, when it comes to, drinks, you know best what you like. Yeah? You know what potatoes you want. And the moment you taste it or you even hold it, you know whether it's the potato you want. You smell the drink or you put your tongue in it and you know whether you want it. So you have you have the best information set there is regarding the quality of what you're getting. When it comes to health, it is precisely the opposite. The only reason why you're going to the doctor is because you have no fucking idea what's wrong with you, right? And there is no way of checking the veracity of what the doctor tells you. Similarly, when you go to university, I'm speaking now as a university teacher, right? The whole point is that the customer does not know best. Because if the student knew, they wouldn't be a student. By definition, my job as a teacher is to liberate them from what they think they know, from their prejudices, in other words, right? So if there is a market for education or a market for health, that market is bound to fail. It can be proven as a mathematical theorem that it will fail, because if the doctor is driven by the motive of profit maximization, the doctor will always recommend to you the kind of treatment which is most expensive, and only by accident will it be the one that is suitable for you. So it is a system, if it's driven by profit, it's a system whereby the customer doesn't know what's right for her or him, and the doctor has every reason to mislead them. That's how the system is built. And
could I jump in quickly and just give one real life example from California? When our first child was born in the United States, we had 2 in California and 2 in London. My wife wanted to have a home birth, and our private insurance company would not allow that. And it came to light that the reason was she was young and healthy, but so she was a good candidate for home birth. But if you're at home, they have fewer opportunities to like upsell you and add on things to your birth.
Indeed.
So they just wouldn't allow this
Indeed.
woman to have her baby out of her, by their estimation, pretty healthy body in her own home. So that's sort of one example. And then also Obamacare provides another fantastic example, which would dovetail well with the mathematical theorem that proves that healthcare should not be private, is that they had 50, because there are 50 states, marketplaces for these different healthcare plans. And you'd have people saying like, well, I'm in Idaho. I don't want somebody from New Hampshire telling me what I should do with my pancreas. And the answer to that is you absolutely do. If that person in New Hampshire is a doctor who's gone to medical school, your lovely pancreas is not unique, and the treatment protocols for these things. I mean, the greatest prognostic tool for any operation's success is how many times has the doctor done that procedure before. That's the best one. So it is numbers, and no, you can't outsmart it. You can't monetize it. You can't innovate it or disrupt it. So those are just a couple of real life examples that give what you're saying support.
Indeed. But the asymmetry of information between doctor and patient, okay, becomes a money-making machine for pharmaceutical companies, because then they have every reason to go to the doctor and say, look, whoever comes to you prescribe this, that, and the other, okay, because it's the most expensive medicine. The asymmetry information between patient and doctor means that the patient will never be able to judge whether that is the case. So there is opacity there. And then you have, because everything becomes so expensive, you need insurance. And then insurance goes through this dynamic of, let's call it enshittification, right? Of making everything shit. Because the moment you have increases in insurance premium, that brings out of the market, pushes out of the market the young, healthy, who do not see the reason why they should pay those premium when they're young and healthy. So you end up with the pool of customers of the insurance companies being the older and the unhealthier ones, which means that they will increase insurance premium further. And that thus drive even more relatively healthy people, until the only people who want to be insured are the rich, ill people. At which point the insurance companies themselves do not make money. And then Obamacare comes in and helps the insurance companies, not the people. So any system which is predicated upon the free market of providing education or health is bound to fail. We've known that. It was in the textbooks of right-wing economists in the 1960s and 70s. But of course, there is a lot of money to be made by forgetting what the textbooks say. That's one point. And the second point, if I make a geopolitical point and a broader political point. You mentioned, Raoul, that the Labour Party, even the Labour Party, has privatized the NHS from within. The Labour Party, Clement Attlee's Labour Party, was the one that started the welfare state. They started the NHS. They started public education, public hospital, public universities. But that was at the time when capitalism was facing a clear and present existentialist threat from communism. Not that the Soviet Union would come in with a Red Army taking over Britain. No. Their threat was British soldiers returning in 1945 from Europe with socialist ideals, because they had seen that the only people who actually fought against the Nazis were the communists. In France, in Italy, in Greece, in Poland, in Russia, and so on. The only serious opposition to the Nazis were the socialists. And they also came back with one thing in mind: we will never go back into the cage of the British class system, which subjected us to that awful period in the 1920s and 30s of the immiseration of the British working class. That's what elevated the Labour Party and made them, essentially, there was a social contract between the leadership of the Labour Party and British aristocracy, British bourgeoisie. We are going to take some of your dough That was what the Labour Party said to the British aristocracy. We will tax you a little bit, we'll do that, but we will save capitalism for you by civilizing it, by introducing the NHS, by introducing public universities, right? And then the Tories, when they won government in 1950 with Churchill, when he came back, well, they thought that this was a pretty good deal. That's why they adopted the NHS. They adopted public universities. They even built more public universities. All the new universities around London. The one I went to, Essex, right? They were built and completed under the Tories because it was a good way of impeding the progress or a red-blooded socialism. The mixed economy, as they used to call it, right? So even the Tories accepted, the welfare state and the mixed economy. Because let me remind you that Thatcher never dared introduce fees in universities. Same in Australia, because I lived in Australia too. It was the Australian Labour Party that introduced fees in universities, that broke down collective bargaining agreements. So, this is not a contest between the center left and the center right. Very often the center left is the first mover in the process of dismantling public institutions that the center left had created.
That makes me think of, every election, and this is a year of elections in the US, UK, elsewhere. We are bombarded by the center left with arguments of the type that in the end you have to vote for the lesser of two evils. And I just wonder if the situation now has become so extreme, with the centre-left actually looking more and more like the centre-right, reneging on almost every progressive promise and policy, and particularly with the issue of Gaza, where we've had both parties in the UK and in the US wholeheartedly, financially, diplomatically supporting genocide. So has this argument run its course? This very clever trap of offering essentially two choices at the ballot box, both of which are very, very similar. How do you think we should be responding to this situation at the next election?
Well, first, I'll say, I think framing it as sort of what to do at the ballot box is maybe not the place to start, only because there's a lot that's wrong with our current age and circumstances, but there have been magnificent waves of protest and increases in union membership and strength. And there are things that we can do. And I think one thing, for example, that a Starmer or a Sunak would tell us is that the way to participate in democracy is to vote when we tell you, in these national elections. Beyond that, you don't really need to do anything. And so I think the thing to do is to both study history, because there are real lessons. I mean, one thing, the modern, the stage of capitalism that we're in right now, that both our leaders and our newspapers and websites and all that try to do, is to try to say, don't look at history. And one reason they do that, education is under major attack in the US, for example. One reason they do that is because if you look at history, you're immediately going to draw incredible lessons that really empower you of movements and methods that can help. So I would say, if somebody's like, I don't know what to do with the ballot box, I would say, really don't worry about that. Voting, yes, I vote. But it's sort of the least important way that I participate in democracy, because otherwise I'm talking to other people, I'm going to protests, I'm doing my best to educate myself, I'm doing my best to share what I've learned, both with my children in my house, which is probably my most important job, and then a distant fifth would be with anybody I talk to in a podcast or on a TV show and the people who listen to that, because the stuff that we do locally is wildly powerful. And it's when we're doing the smaller things that can link up together. So yeah, voting here is going to be a nightmare in the next election. And I mean, just how poisonous the news climate is going to be in the lead up to it. But we don't want to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, well, I just check a box and that's all I can do. Because that's how you fail and how things really fall apart. But if you were to write down, if everybody listening wrote down on a piece of paper 5 things that they did between now and when they do vote, we'd be in vastly better shape. So that's my back of the envelope sketch.
No, I agree entirely with Rob. But, Raul, you are posing a very real dilemma. I remember when Hillary was running against the Donald in 2016. I was on stage somewhere in New York in some event with Noam Chomsky. And the question was put to us, what would we do? What would I do if I were a US citizen and had the vote? And what would Noam do? And with one voice, we said, vote for the Green Party in states where there's a clear-cut lead by one of the two. But in states where it's touch and go, that's what we both said with now, hold your nose and vote for Clinton because the other guy is a fascist. Now, I'm not sure I would be able to say the same thing now because of the genocide. You see, if this was 1965 with Lyndon Johnson, who, when it came to domestic politics, he was actually quite good. I mean, the Great Society lifted millions out of poverty. But at the same time, he was carrying out a genocidal war in Vietnam. So the black kids that he was saving from poverty in Missouri and Minnesota, right? He was shoving them in the battlefields to be killed in Indochina. So back then, I would not have voted for Lyndon Johnson. I think I would have voted for a third party if there was one. Similarly today, if I were in Britain, there is no way I would vote for Keir Starmer's party. But because anyway, it's not just that he's an active participant, totally complicit in the genocide of Palestinians, but he's also totally right-wing when it comes. It's not like Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson has something going for him. There's nothing going for Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has abandoned everything that ever made the Labour Party even this much better than the Tories. Now they've just ditched the 25 billion whatever, green funding, green investment. They are ditching everything. They are trying to be more royalist than King Charles. Today in Britain, I would definitely vote for the Green Party. And one last thing, you see that whenever one of the center-left parties is in danger of being taken over, in inverted commas, by genuine progressives, whether that was Bernie in the case of the Democratic Party or Jeremy Corbyn in the case of the Labour Party, you can see that their own party has one objective: to defeat their leader, to elect the opposition, the Republicans, the Tories, in order to kill off any serious progressive within their parties. So, the Labourites under Jeremy Corbyn, the only thing they wanted, I remember in the 2017 election when, Corbyn did much better than anybody expected, than I expected. He certainly did better than Tony Blair had done in terms of percentages of vote. The majority of Labour members of Parliament were bereft because they had done so well. And here's how I conclude. My criticism of Bernie Sanders, whom I know and love and I have lots of affection for, and we've done things together and I cherish my friendship with him. Nevertheless, I've said this before in public and I'll say it once again. After 2016, it was a huge error to stay within the Democratic Party. He had an army of 900,000 activists across the United States. That was the foundation of a third party, of a proper progressive third party. And he wasted it by staying in a Democratic Party and, ending up being used also by Biden, who gave him the chairmanship of some committee. He did a little bit of good in there, but that was only in order to usurp the progressive, the Democratic Socialists of America. And now you can see that, especially with Israel, he's jettisoning all of them. And, Biden is becoming, just like Keir Starmer, the agent of warmongering, the upping the ante with China. Donald Trump started the Cold War with China, the new Cold War with China, and Biden turbocharged it. See what's happening, what he's doing now in Yemen, what he's doing in Gaza, the way that he's pursuing a never-ending war in Ukraine. Not in my name. I would never vote for the Democrats, and I would never vote for this Labour Party.
I think we're coming close to the end of our hour. Rob, as you know, this podcast is launching in conjunction with a 6-part documentary series that I've made about Yanis's political journey and thought. We started our conversation by sort of talking about the relationship between art and politics. So, my hope is that the series combines elements of the artistic and the political, and hopefully that's useful in illuminating these dark times. I'd just be curious, in general, what do you go to nourish your soul, given you engage with the horrors going on in Gaza and
sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, first I would say that yes, I have seen the series, and it is magnificent, and it is something that I'll even watch again, and I can't wait to promote it far and wide once it drops, because we're looking at a lot. It offers broad historical perspective, but really razor sharp look at things that have happened in the last even 15 years. And I've always enjoyed history, and of late, say in the last 10 years, I've drawn greatest strength from looking a little further back. Sometimes 100 years, 150 years. But what I was struck by this is how illuminating it is, and how quickly we are distracted and urged to forget things that happened really quite recently. Like I got a charge when Yanis reminded me now 20 minutes ago about Obama killing the private option, or rather allowing it to be killed, as he might say. And so that's something where we got to go back and look at what people have done before to succeed. Okay, things that I look at to make me feel better, or at least more realistically orient me. There's one book that is really sort of a Bible to me, and it is called A Distant Mirror, The Calamitous 14th Century by Barbara Tuchman. And it's just a really wonderful look at a time when people had major ammunition to the argument that the world was ending. We've got unbelievable war, paroxysms of war everywhere, all over the Europe that we know, and then the plague. And so we've got extreme weather things happening, and it looks bad. And she really takes you there very well. I like that book a lot because it's popular, it's hip, it's cool to say that this is the end of the world, and the apocalypse is nigh. I really fundamentally don't believe that. And the reason I don't believe it is because I practice self-care of reading history. That isn't to say that we don't face incredible challenges that could decimate, the human population in not too much time, but there's so much out there that we can absorb from history that helps us be clear-eyed about the present moment. And also, just from like a physics perspective, energy can't go when I was, I would sometimes get yelled at on the street with my kids for supporting a Labour Party vocally when it was led by Corbyn, right? So I thought, all right, I'm doing the right thing, And then that project gets defeated, not destroyed and atomized, but or I guess atomized might be an appropriate word. That energy goes elsewhere, and you've seen amazing protest movement in the UK and in the US of late. And that's not enough, of course. When you go home from the protests, you got to go to your reading group and your study group, and you've got to educate yourself with the historical stuff that I'm talking about. But you don't defeat the project of a Sanders or a Corbyn or their equivalents in other cultures and then just wipe your hands of it. You know, our enemies, as it were, go back to the drawing board every night, and so must we. And so there's the things that we're up against are horrific, you know, and they might kill any one of us, but they can't kill us all. And take a page from my book. You know, I talk about, I think one reason I might be effective in stuff when I talk about it is because I mentioned my son who died. If you kill me for an idea, then I get to go be with the people who went before me. You know, I don't know what happens next, but if some version of that is me blended in some cosmic cocktail, you know, with my son who died, like that's one of my secret weapons is the fearlessness and the willingness to, you know, what are you going to do? Put me in jail? I mean, I've been in jail. You to kill me? Cool. I'm ready. You know what I mean? So just be ready to die and read a lot of history. That's my advice.
I love that answer. Thank you. Yanis, do you have any final words about what nourishes you, given all this?
What nourishes me? Music. I've told you this before. For me, music does it. Good drama, you know, whether it's theater or good cinema, or these days series can be quite good, you know. Even the ones on, you know, the techno-feudal lords platforms can be pretty good. That's good enough. You know, I'm quite happy to go out with some good music and a good piece of drama.
Well, look, guys, thank you so much for this conversation. Rob, it's been a real pleasure. You're brilliant. You're funny. You're insightful.
You guys are.
I love your work. And I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have.
It's been great for me. I hope you guys don't immediately delete it. That was enough of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Raoul, again. And Rob, it's great meeting you. I hope to, you know, meet in 3D at some point.
Oh, yeah. I hope we do too. Yeah, I'm sure we will.
Yeah. It'll be fun.
Cool. We'll make it happen. All right. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to our channel.